how I love this city of mine. It never gets me down, yeah.
Good morning everybody. Dylan K. Johnson here and welcome back to a new video. As you can see, I've got two different benches sitting in front of me here. We've got on my left the Rep Fitness AB-5000 zero gap adjustable bench, and then on my right we have the Rep Fitness AB-4100 adjustable bench. Today we're going to be looking at both of these, kind of going and comparing and contrasting the different specs and features that each one has to offer, so you guys can get an idea of the differences between the two of them. And then I'll also kind of throw in my initial impressions of the 4100, kind of what I've thought about it so far after just kind of using it a few times. I've just barely gotten this bench. And then I'll also talk to you guys a little bit about why I am actually keeping the 4100 and selling my 5000 or my zero gap bench. So basically replacing my zero gap with the 4100. So we're gonna start things off by looking at the prices for each of these so you can get an idea of kind of where they stand when compared to a bunch of different stuff out there. For the zero gap bench, it's coming in at $600 currently before tax, and then for the 4100, it's coming in at $400. So that's a pretty significant price difference just kind of right out of the gate. $200 is nothing to sneeze at. Now you might be wondering why they're so significantly different and why I'm actually downgrading in terms of price, downgrading from the zero gap to the 4100. Well, let's kind of go over some of the different specs and features that each one has to offer. First and foremost, the difference in height might mean something to some people. For me, it doesn't personally, so it's not a huge issue. But when you're looking at the zero gap, it's coming in at 17.5 inches from the ground to the top of the pad, whereas the 4100, you're looking at 17 inches from the ground to the top of the pad. So a half inch might not make a huge difference to some people, but if you're looking at competition spec in terms of powerlifting competitions, powerlifting meets, the 4100 will check that box if that's something that you're looking for. Now, getting into another big difference between the two of them is the overall length of the benches. The zero gap is coming in at 57 inches, whereas the 4100 is 51.3 inches. We'll just call it 51 inches. Basically, it's 6 inches shorter than the zero gap. Now, on paper, again, 6 inches might not seem like a lot, but when you look at these two benches side by side, and you'll see as I throw up a few different comparison shots here, a little bit of video, it is actually visually significantly different. And that could just be in part due to the reduction in pad size when comparing the two of them, because you also have that kind of 2-inch gap on the 4100, whereas the zero gap does not. But 6 inches in total length in terms of the difference of them is nothing to sneeze at. And one thing just kind of right out of the gate that's going to be extremely nice for is maneuvering the 4100 around the gym. As you guys may recall, if you watched my review video of the zero gap bench, one of my largest complaints, probably my real only complaint about it, was the weight and just kind of how hard it is to pick up and kind of maneuver around my gym. It's actually almost a limiting factor in kind of what you can do with it just because of how heavy it is, especially for somebody like my wife. So going to the 4100, the shorter length makes it much easier to pick up, much easier to kind of maneuver around a tight space like a home or garage gym. And then if you're looking at the difference in weight between the two of them, the 5000 comes in at 110 pounds, so pretty damn heavy, whereas the 4100 clocks in at about 85, 86 pounds according to Rep's website. But that's not all. The biggest difference, in my opinion, between the two of them for the weight is going to be how the weight is distributed. So this is something that I actually didn't really talk about in my review video, but with the zero gap, with the 5000 bench, the majority of the weight is distributed towards the front of the bench where the handle is located. So when you're picking that bench up, I'd say you're picking up close to 60, 70 pounds of overall weight because of how much of it is at the front of that bench. If you look at these videos here, you've not only got the zero gap adjustment feature at the front of the bench above the handle, all of the angle adjustments are also positioned towards the front of the bench. Whereas if you take a look at this kind of side shot of the 4100, the majority of the weight is evenly distributed across the entirety of the bench because it doesn't have that zero gap feature, and then also due to the ladder style adjustment. It doesn't have a lot of weight focused in one singular spot when compared to the 5000 series bench. So it's one of those things where it just makes picking up the 4100 so much easier. It is literally night and day difference when you're talking about picking up one versus the other. The other nice thing in terms of, again, picking them up is the position or the orientation of the handle. With the zero gap, it has the handle kind of straight in line with the bench, versus with the 4100, the handle is turned horizontally or perpendicular to the line of the bench so that it makes it just really easy to kind of bend down, grab it, pick the whole bench up, and you're good to go. So that's something that, in my opinion, is going to be extremely nice going forward with the new 4100 bench. It is, just in the few days that I've had it, I can already tell you it is going to be amazing to move around the gym when you're talking about comparing it to the 5000 series or the zero gap bench. Both my wife and I are both extremely pleased with how much easier it is to pick up and maneuver the 4100 just because of how much lighter it is. So now that we've kind of covered the different specs of each bench, let's start talking about some of the different features that each one has to offer. We're going to start off with the zero gap and its decline feature, because this is something that the 4100 does not have. So the zero gap does have the ability, if you purchase a separate leg attachment, to be used as a decline bench. So it's technically a flat, incline, and decline, or a FID bench. Now, that might be a deal breaker for some of you guys because, as I said, the 4100 does not have this ability. But personally, for my wife and I, over the 3.5+ years that we've owned the zero gap bench, we have never once wanted or needed a decline feature, which is why we actually don't own that leg attachment. So for us, it wasn't a deal breaker. It really didn't make any, it wasn't even a consideration when we got the zero gap bench. At the time, this was just kind of one of the most affordable and nicest benches on the market from everything that I could tell. So that was originally why we got that one. Also, I really liked the idea of the zero gap feature. But yeah, talking about the decline, the 4100 has no decline feature, whereas the zero gap does. So that's kind of one of those things you have to keep in mind. Moving on to another feature that the 4100 does not have, obviously, is going to be the zero gap. So this is something that actually has been extremely nice to have over the past 3.5 years. With the zero gap, you're basically able to completely eliminate the gap between the back pad and seat pad, no matter what angle you set the bench at. One really nice thing with that is in terms of flat benching. So just having the benches down side by side here in a flat position, you can see that with the zero gap, I have no gap between the seat pad and the back pad, whereas with the 4100, I have about a 2-inch gap here with this pretty hard piece of metal right in the center of it. So for some people, that might be kind of one of those things where it's like, you really have to work on adjusting your position on the bench to where you're not too low, you're not too high, your tailbone isn't resting right in that gap. And then again, tying that into the slightly shorter length of the 4100, it might be a little bit trickier for you to kind of get that positioning right. For me, I've done a bit of testing with it. I've done a few sets of bench. I've done a whole push day, and I didn't have any issue with this gap. It is going to take a little bit of adjusting to kind of readjust where my positioning is in terms of benching. But for me, personally, again, even though I've been using the zero gap for 3.5 years, that is not going to be an issue. Now, one of the biggest differences between these two benches that is going to take some getting used to for me is the angle that the seat adjusts to. Now you might be kind of wondering, like, how is that a big difference? Why is that going to be so weird? Well, with the zero gap, it has technically 5 different angles of adjustment, everything from -15 degrees all the way up to 45 degrees, all in 15-degree increments. And when I'm doing any type of chest supported movement on the zero gap bench, I very, very regularly use the 30 and 45 degree options. With the AB-4100, it has 3 different positions, 0, 10, and 20 degrees. So you're significantly more limited in terms of the seat angles that you're able to achieve. when you're looking at the 4100 compared to the zero gap bench. And again, that's one of those things where it's kind of a con, but it's just going to have to be something that I get used to over time. I will have to see how it really comes into play as I use this bench more. This is just kind of my initial impressions of it. Now, getting into some of the back adjustment angles, with these two benches, you have almost identical angles. So you've got 7 different adjustment angles ranging from 0 to 85 degrees on the 4100, whereas on the zero gap, you have from 0 up to 90 degrees. Now, personally, I never use the 90-degree feature or the 90-degree angle for any type of movement. I just really don't like 90 degrees. Anytime I'm doing a pressing movement, I was usually set to 75. And then I tested out the 85-degree angle on this bench just a little bit. It's so close to 90 that personally, I'm just gonna end up sticking to 75 for any type of overhead pressing movement where I'm sitting on the bench. I didn't notice any difference between 85 versus 90 degrees. Some people might. It's kind of one of those little tweaks. But for me, that's not going to make a huge difference. So essentially, the angles of adjustability on the back pad are going to be identical. But with those angles, one big difference between the two of them is how it adjusts. So this also applies to the seat pad with the zero gap bench. As you guys kind of see, it has pop pins, meaning that in order to adjust the back pad, you literally have to use 2 hands. One hand to hold and support the pad of the bench, then the other to pull out the pop pin, lift up the pad to the angle that you desire, let the pop pin go, and it'll lock into the angle that you're wanting to set it to. With the 4100, it has a ladder style system in terms of the angle adjustments, meaning all you have to do for adjusting the back pad is grab it, lift it up to whatever angle you want, the ladder will lock into place, and then you're good to go. For the seat, I have noticed that the seat, you do have to use 2 hands in order to adjust it on the 4100 because that ladder does not kind of have enough weight to swing into position. I might in the future look at seeing if I can kind of modify it to potentially have enough weight to swing into position, and we'll just kind of play around with that in the future. We'll have to see, but for the time being, again, initial impressions, you do have to use 2 hands in order to get the seat into the proper position. Not a huge deal, just something to note. Now, another design difference between the two of these benches that, based on my initial kind of impressions and testing, does actually have a significant impact on the design or on the stability of the benches is the front foot design. So looking at the zero gap bench, you'll notice that it has this front foot that is almost essentially a T. And what that does is it helps add to the lateral stability of this bench, meaning that if I sit here on the front of this bench and I try and rock it from side to side, this is pretty damn stable. It's not rocking unless I really force myself one way or another. It's not going to be moving around at all. Versus if I come over to the 4100 and I do the same exact thing, it's very easy to kind of get this bench to tip. And that's all, in my opinion, part of that is on the design of that front foot. Because it doesn't have that T shape or almost like a tripod shape, it doesn't have that little extra bit of stability. Another big part of that could be in the weight of the benches. Again, because the 5000 series, the zero gap bench is so much heavier, it's going to be much harder to kind of move around. And it's going to be much more stable on the ground versus the lighter 4100, because it's a lot lighter, is going to be a little bit more susceptible to potential instabilities. But that was just kind of one of those things where when I first sat on the bench, if you aren't careful, I could definitely see it being a potential issue, especially if you've got some pretty heavy dumbbells in each hand. You go and you set one down or you move a little bit too carelessly, the bench could potentially kind of shift on you unexpectedly. So it's one of those things where I'll have to see how it feels after I've actually used it. I don't foresee any issues, but it might take a little bit of getting used to now that I'm transitioning between the two of them. So overall, those are kind of the different specs and features of each bench. Again, very quickly getting into why we're switching to the 4100 and selling off the zero gap bench. It's mainly just because of the weight. that zero gap bench is so heavy that my wife has such a hard time moving it around. I even have a hard time moving it around. Again, getting it up and down this little like 2-inch gap on my lifting platform here, my deadlift platform, is a huge freaking pain. And I can tell you right now, just from like 2 days of owning the 4100 and moving it around the gym a little bit, it is a night and day difference. It is gonna be so much nicer. My wife was so happy when she first picked this bench up, and she was able to pick it up without needing to like brace and get ready and almost basically perform like a deadlift picking up this bench. So yeah, that is the main reason that we're going to be switching over to it. Does it have its drawbacks? Yes. Am I going to miss the 5000 series bench? In a lot of ways, yes. It is a very nice bench. It is one of the nicest benches that I have ever used. But when I look at this 4100 series bench, and again, this will be kind of more based on time, the quality of this bench is very strong. It looks great. There's a few kind of plasticky pieces on it that I'm not overly thrilled about, and I'll talk about that when I get into the actual full detailed review of it. But just kind of initial impressions, the build quality on it is solid. It's a very sturdy bench. It's not, I wouldn't consider it in particular, I wouldn't necessarily consider it commercial grade, quote unquote. But if you've got a home gym and you want something that's better than like a super cheap Amazon or Titan Fitness bench, based on my initial impressions, the 4100 series bench is currently probably the best home gym bench on the market. As long as you're not benching like crazy 500-600 pounds to where the 700-pound weight capacity of this bench is going to be a limiting factor. In my opinion, like I said, this is probably the best bench for the majority of people out there. So that is gonna be it for me today. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video. If you have any questions about either of these benches, let me know down below in the comment section. I am gonna be doing a detailed review of the 4100 once I get some more time on it. So if there's anything specific about this bench that you wanna know, let me know down below in the comment section as well, and I will try to cover that when that video goes live. But for now, if you guys want to check out or get one of these benches for yourself, I will have those linked in the description below, so you can go check them out there. Just go click those links and they'll take you right to it. But for now, thank you guys for watching. As always, I will see you all in the next one. Bye. I am so tired. It is like 11:15 at night. You guys are watching this at like 9 o'clock in the morning, but for me, it's bedtime.